Chapter 1. The Ticket That Changed Everything. My name is Rachel Moore. I used to believe that love was proven in the good times, when people laughed with you and said they'd always be there. But when I won $33 million overnight, I decided to test that belief. I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even my best friend, because I wanted to know who truly cared for me when I had nothing left to give. I thought it would be a small experiment, a way to see who still called when the world went silent. But what I discovered shattered the last illusion I had about family, and taught me that silence can reveal more truth than words ever will. I never thought a piece of paper could make my hands shake like that. For 15 years I had been working at Harbor Point Media, a mid-sized marketing firm in Seattle, buried under budgets, deadlines, and endless reports that no one ever read. My job title sounded impressive enough, senior accountant, but in reality, I was the quiet woman in the back office who fixed other people's mistakes and watched my boss, Greg Hollis, present my work as his own. Greg was the kind of man who loved being in charge, slick hair, polished smile, and an ego that could fill a conference room. Every time he praised the team in front of clients, I could almost predict the moment he would use my spreadsheet or analysis as his personal insight. I had stopped correcting him years ago. My closest interaction with ambition came in the form of Olivia Park, our 20-something project coordinator. She was sweet on the surface, always complimenting my blouses or my attention to detail, but I knew she was feeding Greg my numbers early to get ahead. I was too tired to care. That September day in 2022 started like every other. I turned 35 the week before, and the office forgot. Not even a stale cupcake or a card. I had dinner alone at a small Thai place near my apartment, scrolling through pictures of friends from college celebrating anniversaries and babies. I had work, rent paid, and a cat that barely tolerated me. That was enough, I told myself. The next Friday, I left the office late. Rain drizzled down the windshield, streaks of gray over gray. I stopped at a corner store called Jake's Market to pick up milk. The cashier, Jake himself, a man in his 60s with kind eyes, greeted me like he always did. "Rough week, Rachel?" he said. "You have no idea." I smiled. "Throw in a couple of Powerball tickets, will you? Maybe my luck's about to turn." "Birthday luck, huh?" he said. He tore the tickets, slid them across the counter. "Could be your night." I laughed and shoved them into my purse, not thinking twice. That night, I opened a bottle of red wine and turned on a sitcom rerun I'd seen a dozen times. Around 8:30, I pulled out the tickets and my phone. The Powerball numbers were posted. I checked lazily, one by one. The first number matched, so did the second. My heart started to pound. The third, fourth, fifth, all matched. The last one. My fingers trembled. I checked again. I thought I must be reading it wrong. I turned on the TV, rewound the drawing, stared at the glowing balls rolling down the chute. All six. I sat frozen on my couch, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the television. $33.6 million after taxes. I whispered the number out loud. 33 million. I said it again, softer this time. The cat jumped off the couch, startled by my shaking hands. I put the ticket on the coffee table, then immediately snatched it back up as if someone might break in and steal it. My mind spun in 100 directions. What do I do first? Who do I tell? The obvious answer came fast. No one. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I sat in front of my laptop reading every nightmare headline imaginable. Lottery winner bankrupt after 3 years. Man murdered after revealing jackpot. Family torn apart by greed. Each story ended the same way. Money brought chaos. At 10 a.m., I called in sick, the first time in years. I searched for lottery lawyers in Washington state. One name appeared repeatedly, Mark Sanders, known for helping big winners stay anonymous. By noon, I was in his downtown office, the ticket sealed in an envelope inside my purse. Mark was in his 50s, tall, silver hair, calm eyes. He greeted me with the kind of measured tone you use with someone who might faint. "Miss Moore, what can I help you with today?" I placed the envelope on his desk. "I think I just won the Powerball." He opened it carefully, glanced at the numbers, then nodded once. "That you did. Congratulations." His expression didn't change. He had seen this before. Then he leaned forward slightly. "The first thing we do is protect your identity. You'll need to claim it through a blind trust. No one, not your family, not your friends, no one can know until everything is in place." I nodded, still dazed. "What happens if they find out?" He smiled gently. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life managing their expectations instead of your money." We spent the next 2 hours talking about tax implications, financial planners, trust structures. I tried to focus, but my head buzzed with disbelief. When I left, the city felt louder, every honking car and rushing pedestrian echoing in my skull. On the bus ride home, I looked out the window at the gray skyline. The city hadn't changed, but I had. I was rich. Not pay off my credit card rich, but never work again rich. Yet my chest felt heavier than it ever had. That night, I locked the ticket inside a metal box under my bed. I poured another glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table. The glow from the streetlights painted long shadows on the wall. I thought about who to call first. My parents? My brother? The memory of their voices from the last family gathering floated back, each one polite but distant, layered with the subtle judgment I had learned to expect. I imagined how quickly they would change once they knew. No, I wasn't ready for that. Not now. Maybe not ever. I opened my phone and typed a message to Evelyn, my best friend since college, a nurse who worked night shifts at Harborview Hospital. I wrote, "You up?" Then deleted it. She would tell me to breathe, to celebrate, to be proud, but I didn't want joy. I wanted silence. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. My reflection glimmered faintly in the window, just a tired woman in a cheap apartment, still wearing the same cardigan she'd had for years. I whispered to my reflection, testing the words, "I'm a millionaire." The sound didn't fit in my mouth. I thought of my father, always preaching about saving, my mother and her constant worries about appearances, my siblings with their endless needs. I pictured their faces when they learned the truth, the sudden affection, the forced concern. A pulse of anger rose through the fear. For years I had been their safety net, their listener, their invisible accountant cleaning up everyone's mess. They never once asked if I was happy. Now I held something they could never take back. I took the ticket from the box, held it under the lamp, and watched the printed numbers gleam. "Let's see," I whispered. "Who really loves me?" I slid the ticket back into its envelope, locked it away, and turned off the light. The apartment went dark, except for the faint red digits of the clock. 12. 1 a.m. A new day. A new life waiting just on the other side of secrecy. Chapter 2. When Family Stops Feeling Like Home. 8. The first weekend after winning, I drove down to Bellevue for a family dinner. It was one of those forced gatherings my mother liked to arrange, a polite excuse for everyone to show off their latest success or complain about their latest inconvenience. I could already hear her voice on the phone from 2 days earlier, cheerful but tired, reminding me to bring a bottle of wine and maybe a dessert because Richard didn't like store-bought cakes. When I arrived, the house looked exactly as it always had, carefully staged but somehow cold. My mother, Caroline, opened the door with that rehearsed smile she used for guests. She kissed my cheek lightly and said, "Rachel, sweetheart, you look pale. Are you still working too hard?" I told her I was fine. She called out for Richard, who appeared in the hallway in his golf polo, phone in hand, barely glancing up. He shook my hand as if I were one of his employees. Linda arrived next, perfectly dressed in white slacks and oversized sunglasses despite the evening rain. Her husband, Tommy, followed, talking loudly about his latest surgical case. My brother Brian came last, 10 minutes late as usual, wearing jeans that looked like he had slept in them. He gave me a one-armed hug that smelled like beer and said he had a new business idea that would definitely take off this time. I smiled and said nothing. Dinner started with wine and small talk. Richard bragged about his construction contracts in Kirkland. Tommy lectured everyone on new medical technology. Linda scrolled through her phone, showing my mother photos of their new kitchen remodel. Pamela, my father's wife, was there too, having joined through my mother's invitation for some reason that made no sense to me. She arrived with a gift basket of imported olive oil and the self-importance of someone who never stopped performing. When my father walked in, late as usual, he gave me a polite kiss on the forehead and said, "You look tired, kiddo, like you need to get outside more." He said it in the same tone he used when I was 12. Then he turned to Pamela and whispered something that made her laugh. The meal was elegant, of course, because everything in my mother's life had to look effortless: roasted salmon, asparagus, some kind of lemon risotto. Halfway through, Pamela put down her fork and looked straight at me. 35 and still single, she said. "I suppose your career isn't going as well as you say." The table went quiet. My mother gave a nervous laugh. Brian chuckled because he always sided with whoever had the most money, and Linda smirked, eyes on her phone. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. I smiled the way you do when you feel the air leave your chest. "Work keeps me busy," I said. Pamela nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. "I just worry about you. It's not natural to be alone for so long." I wanted to say that what was not natural was pretending to care about people you secretly despised, but instead, I folded my napkin and said, "Excuse me, I need a refill." I stood and walked to the kitchen. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from clarity. From the dining room, I heard Richard's voice bragging about his new car, and Linda laughing at something Tommy whispered. It was the same music I had heard my entire life, a chorus of self-importance disguised as family. When I returned, no one noticed. They were deep in conversation about property taxes. I sat quietly, picking at my food, thinking about how easy it was to disappear even when you were sitting right in front of them. After dessert, my father clinked his glass for attention. "Before anyone leaves, let's take a family photo." Everyone groaned but stood up. He handed his phone to me and said, "Could you take one of us?" "Of course," I said. I lifted the phone and took their picture, all of them smiling under the chandelier, a perfect portrait of togetherness. Then he said, "Now one with Rachel." Pamela switched places with me. The flash went off, freezing our smiles in place. I wondered if any of them would look at that photo later and realize how far apart we all really were. When I finally left, the air outside felt clean for the first time all night. The rain had stopped, and the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. I wasn't angry. I was done being surprised. On the drive home, I thought about each of them. My father, logical and cold. My mother, all appearances and no backbone. Brian, chasing shortcuts. Linda, forever pretending her life was perfect. Pamela, the self-appointed judge of everyone else. They would all treat me differently if they knew. They would smile wider, call more often, ask about my plans. The thought made me sick. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sat at my desk. The air smelled faintly of rain and printer paper. I opened my laptop, created a new document, and typed the title in bold letters: "The Loyalty Test." The cursor blinked under it, waiting. I began to list their names in order: David, Caroline, Richard, Pamela, Brian, Linda, Tommy. Next to each, I wrote a number from 1 to 10, rating how likely they were to help me if I needed it. It was ridiculous, maybe even cruel, but it made me feel in control. For my father, I gave a 3. He would offer advice, not money. For my mother, a 4. She would express sympathy but claim her hands were tied. For Richard, 0. He didn't believe in giving anything without collateral. For Pamela, -10. She'd probably charge interest. Brian got a 2. He would say he wanted to help, then ask for a loan instead. Linda, 5. Only because she liked to appear generous in front of others. Tommy, 1 because he barely remembered I existed. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the list. It looked sterile, just words and numbers on a screen, but each one carried years of disappointment. My throat tightened, and I closed the laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. The Space Needle glowed faintly in the distance, the city humming below it. I thought about how small I felt and how much smaller they had made me over the years, without even noticing. That was when the idea came fully formed, clear as daylight. I didn't just want to guess who would be there for me. I wanted to know. I would give them the same chance I had given them my whole life, only this time without the safety net of my help. I would see who reached back when I fell. I poured myself a glass of water, sat back down, and reopened the laptop. Under the title, I typed the first line of my plan. Step 1. Create a believable story. Step 2. Ask for help. Step 3. Wait and see who shows up. Outside, the rain started again, soft against the window. I listened for a long time, letting the rhythm steady my breath. Tomorrow would look exactly the same to everyone else, but I knew something had changed. This time, I wasn't the one who needed saving. I was about to find out who deserved a place in the new life waiting for me. Chapter 3. The Test of Loyalty. The next morning, I woke up with the strange calm that comes before doing something you know might hurt, but feels necessary. The loyalty test was no longer an idea, it was a plan. I sat at my desk, coffee steaming beside me, and opened a blank email to myself, writing down every detail of the story I was about to tell. Blue Harbor Media, my fake company, had been shut down after a fraud investigation. I had lost my job unexpectedly, my severance was frozen, and to make things worse, I had slipped on some wet stairs the previous week and needed minor surgery. Medical bills were piling up. All I needed was $5,000 to stay afloat until I found another position. The story was believable enough, sad enough, but not too dramatic. I rehearsed it out loud until the words sounded natural. When I was ready, I picked up my phone and scrolled to the first name on my list. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, too bright, as if she had been waiting for someone else to call. Rachel, honey, is everything all right? I told her what had happened, the fake company closure, the hospital bill, the stress. She gasped in all the right places, said how terrible it was, how unfair. For a moment, I almost believed she might help. Then came the shift. Well, you know how things are with Richard right now, she said, softly. He just bought new equipment for the business, and money is tight, but let me talk to him. Maybe we can help with a small amount. Her voice thinned at the end. I knew what that meant. I told her not to worry, that I understood. She sighed in relief, already moving on in her mind. Please keep me updated, okay? You're so strong, you'll get through this. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone. The line between sympathy and avoidance had never been clearer. I made a note in my document beside her name, concerned but non-committal. Next was my father. I hesitated before dialing. He picked up on the third ring, his tone formal, as if answering a work call. Rachel, I was just about to step out. What's going on? I told him the story again, this time faster. He made small noises. And I see. Until I mentioned the $5,000. There was a pause. I've always told you to keep an emergency fund, he said, 6 months of expenses, remember? That's what it's for, I said quietly. I didn't expect to lose everything overnight. He sighed, the way he used to when grading papers. That's life, kiddo. It throws punches. You learn to roll with them. Maybe it's a good time to rethink your career path. Accounting firms are always looking for hard workers. He didn't ask how I felt, only what lesson I had learned. When I said I just needed temporary help, he replied, "It wouldn't be wise for me to dip into retirement. We're budgeting carefully this year. You'll manage, you always do." By the time we hung up, my throat felt tight. I wrote beside his name, lecture, no help. I called Brian next. He answered with music blaring in the background. "Hey sis, what's up?" I told him, keeping it brief. His response was immediate. "That sucks. I'm tight on cash myself right now, trying to get this new crypto thing going. I'll call you later, okay?" He didn't. Then came Linda. I decided to text her instead of calling. She rarely answered anyway. I wrote, "Things are rough right now. Lost my job. Might need some help." A few minutes later, her reply popped up. "You'll be fine, sis. You're strong." Then a muscle arm emoji and a heart. No offer, no question, nothing. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Pamela was last. I hesitated but forced myself to call. She answered on speakerphone, her voice echoing slightly. "Rachel, what a surprise." I explained everything again. She listened without interruption, then said, "Adults deal with their own mistakes. I'm sure this will teach you to plan better." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even say goodbye, just hung up. By noon, it was done. Every call, every text, every empty reassurance, recorded neatly in my notes. I sat there feeling nothing at first, then the weight of silence settled in, the kind that fills a room when you finally understand something you had always tried to ignore. I made a sandwich I didn't eat, walked around my apartment, looked at the framed photo of our family from 10 years ago. We looked perfect then. Maybe we had all been pretending even back then. By late afternoon, I couldn't stand the quiet. I poured another cup of coffee and tried to distract myself by watching TV, but the noise only made it worse. I kept checking my phone, half expecting someone to call back, to say they had changed their mind. No one did. As the sun started to set, the sky outside turned the color of cold steel. I stood by the window, watching the lights flicker on in the neighboring buildings. Somewhere, families were gathering for dinner, voices overlapping, laughter spilling through the walls. Mine felt like another world entirely. The phone vibrated suddenly, and my heart jumped. An unknown number. I answered quickly. "Honey, it's Aunt Grace." Her voice was warm, trembling a little. "I heard from your mom about your job. Are you okay?" For a second, I couldn't speak. I forced my voice steady. "I'm managing, just trying to figure things out." "Bless your heart. You sound tired. Why don't you come up to Tacoma tomorrow? I'll make something comforting, maybe roast chicken, your favorite." "You don't have to do that," I said softly. "I know," she replied. "I want to." The line went quiet for a beat, just the sound of her breathing, steady and kind. Then she added, "You've always been there for everyone else, Rachel. Let someone be there for you this time." When we hung up, I set the phone down and leaned against the counter. My chest felt heavy, but not from sadness. It was the weight of being seen after a day of pretending. I looked at the notes on my laptop, the neat list of names and reactions. Beside them, I added a new entry at the bottom. Grace Turner. Called me first. Offered dinner. No questions asked. Outside, the city lights blurred in the drizzle, and I felt something shift inside me. Among all the polished voices and hollow words, hers was the only one that carried warmth. That night, I packed an overnight bag and placed it by the door. I didn't know what I would tell her yet, or how much of the truth I would reveal, but I knew I needed to go. The test was over. The answers were clear. For the first time since winning, I didn't feel alone. I just felt small, human, and strangely safe in the thought of a woman in Tacoma waiting to make me dinner. Chapter 4. The Aunt with the Big Heart. By late morning the next day, I was driving south toward Tacoma. The clouds hung low over the highway, the kind that looked heavy enough to touch. I hadn't been to Aunt Grace's apartment in years, maybe since college. Back then, she had been the kind of aunt who sent handwritten birthday cards and brought homemade cookies to every family event. She never had much, but she always had enough to give something away. When I parked outside her building, an old brick complex lined with maple trees, I felt a wave of quiet. It smelled like rain and warm earth, not like the city's metallic air. Grace opened the door before I even knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, glasses slipping down her nose. The moment she saw me, her face lit up like I had brought sunshine into her doorway. "There you are, sweetheart," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "You look thin. Come in, come in." Her apartment was exactly how I had pictured it. Plants on every windowsill, books stacked in uneven piles, and the faint scent of chamomile tea drifting from the kitchen. A cat I didn't remember stared at me suspiciously from the couch. Grace waved toward the table, where 2 plates were already set: roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans. "You didn't have to cook," I said, my throat tight. "I know," she replied with a soft laugh, "but feeding someone is how I worry less. Sit down before it gets cold." We ate mostly in silence. The food was simple and comforting, the kind that reminded me of childhood dinners before everything got complicated. Grace asked a few gentle questions about my job, nothing probing. I gave the same rehearsed story I had told everyone else, about the company shutting down, about bills and uncertainty. She listened with her full attention, her eyes kind and steady. When I finished, she reached for her purse hanging on the chair beside her. She pulled out a small white envelope, the corners slightly worn, and slid it across the table. "It's not much," she said quietly, "but it might help with rent until you get back on your feet." I stared at it. The flap was sealed, her name written in small cursive across the front. I didn't have to open it to know what was inside. "I can't take that," I said quickly. "You can. And you will," she replied. "It's $3,000. I've been saving a little each month for emergencies. Right now, it sounds like you're the emergency." My eyes burned before I could stop them. I shook my head. "You need that, Grace. You live on a pension." She smiled gently. "Money only matters if it helps someone you love sleep a little easier. Besides, I'll still have enough to keep the lights on." That broke me. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. I pressed my hands over my eyes, tears hot and sudden. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and fragile. "You've always carried too much on your own," she said. "You don't have to do that here." After dinner, she insisted I stay the night. The guest room was small, with a quilted blanket and the smell of lavender. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope she had left on the nightstand. The paper felt heavier than it should. I thought about the contrast between this quiet apartment and the sterile houses of my parents and siblings, full of cold words and expensive furniture. Grace had so little, yet she was the only one who had offered without hesitation. Guilt rolled through me until I couldn't breathe. She had given me almost everything she had because she believed I needed it. The lie that had felt harmless now felt cruel. I got up, walked to the doorway of her bedroom, and called softly. "Grace?" She was sitting in bed reading, glasses low on her nose. She looked up immediately. "Can't sleep?" I hesitated, then stepped inside, my heart pounding. "There's something I have to tell you." She set her book down, eyes patient. "Go ahead, sweetheart." I took a breath. "I didn't lose my job." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The words came out before I could second-guess them. "I won the lottery." The Powerball. $33.6 million. dollars. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the old heater. Grace didn't react, didn't gasp or smile. She just watched me, her expression calm, as if waiting for the truth to finish settling in the air. Finally, she said, "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order." Then she smiled faintly. "So now you know." "Know what?" I whispered. "Money doesn't change people," she said. "It reveals them." I sat down in the chair across from her. My chest felt hollow. I told her everything, how no one else had offered to help, how I had tested them all, how her phone call had been the only real kindness I'd received. When I finished, she reached over and patted my hand again. "You wanted to see who loved you for you," she said softly. "I can understand that, but don't let what they did make you smaller. Use what you've been given to build something good." I looked at her, tears drying on my cheeks. "I will," I said. "I promise I will. I'll make it mean something." She nodded, leaning back against her pillow. "True kindness doesn't need to be seen. You don't owe anyone proof." Her words sank deep. For the first time since the numbers had matched on that screen, I felt something close to peace. I stood, turning off the lamp on her nightstand. "Good night, Grace. Good night, honey. Sleep well." In the darkness of the guest room, I could still smell chamomile and old paper. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the envelope still on the nightstand beside me. I didn't touch it. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what it represented, the quiet strength of someone who gave without asking why. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady against the glass. I closed my eyes and listened to it, letting it wash over the guilt and the noise and the loneliness. I had spent my whole life trying to earn love through usefulness, through sacrifice. Grace had reminded me that love, the real kind, didn't need to be earned. It just needed to be given and received without fear. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of numbers fading away into light, and of my aunt's calm voice saying that money reveals, not changes. The morning would bring decisions, plans, consequences. But for that night, the world felt smaller and gentler than it had in years. Chapter 5. Silence is its own revenge. When I returned to Seattle the following week, the city looked different. The skyline shimmered under a pale autumn sun, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing it from a distance, like an observer instead of a participant. My secret had become a quiet companion, tucked deep inside me. Grace's words still echoed in my head. Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. I decided to keep my job at Harbor Point Media for a while longer. Part of it was strategy, part habit. Walking into that glass building every morning made me feel invisible in the best possible way. No one suspected anything. My coworkers still treated me as the reliable, unremarkable accountant who worked through lunch and never complained. That anonymity felt safer than freedom. Greg was in one of his moods when I got back. The company had just landed a major client, a tech startup from San Francisco with too much money and too little discipline. I had built the entire proposal myself, late nights spent calculating their projected returns, adjusting budgets, running risk models until my eyes burned. It was the kind of work that reminded me I was good at what I did. The morning of the client presentation, Greg called me into the conference room. He wore his usual expensive smile, polished and rehearsed. Olivia sat beside him, flipping through a printed copy of my report as if she had written it herself. "You'll sit in on this one, Rachel," Greg said, "just in case they have technical questions." I nodded. I had learned long ago that sit in meant stay quiet. The clients arrived, all handshakes and overconfidence. Greg launched into the presentation, clicking through my slides. With every sentence, I felt my stomach tighten. He spoke about the analysis, the projections, the model, as if they were his creations. Olivia chimed in occasionally, pretending to clarify small points. I kept my face neutral. eyes on the numbers glowing across the screen, but every word scraped against me like sandpaper. When the meeting ended, the clients congratulated Greg. They loved the plan, they called it innovative. He thanked them, promising follow-up documentation. Not once did my name come up. As everyone filed out, I stayed seated, pretending to gather my notes. Greg waited until the last person left, then looked at me. "Don't make a scene," he said in a low voice. "You should be grateful I kept you on the project." Olivia lingered near the door, smirking like a child watching a game she already knew the outcome of. I forced a small smile. "I am grateful," I said quietly, then stood and left. That night I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen. The anger had burned itself out hours earlier, leaving only clarity. For years I had swallowed humiliation like medicine, telling myself it was the price of stability. Now, I had nothing to lose. I started organizing files. Every spreadsheet, every email, every draft showing my authorship. Then I found something I hadn't expected, a pattern of duplicated expenses hidden inside Greg's project reports. The numbers didn't add up, small enough to slip through at first glance, but consistent enough to be intentional. I printed the documents and locked them in my desk. The next day, I confided in Derek, one of the few co-workers I trusted. He was quiet, steady, a father of two who kept his head down and did his job. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm not doing it for revenge. I just want the truth to exist somewhere other than my head." Derek hesitated, then said he knew someone in internal audit who would take the information anonymously. Within the week, the files were sent. Days passed. Nothing happened. Greg strutted around the office, like always, talking too loudly, making sure everyone saw his new watch. Olivia smiled, her rehearsed smile. I went through the motions, quiet and patient. Every night, I waited for the first ripple. It came a month later. I walked into the office to find the air thick with tension. People whispered near the coffee machine, glancing toward Greg's office. His door was closed. Around noon, two men from corporate audit arrived, briefcases in hand. By 3 o'clock, Greg was gone. Olivia followed shortly after, pale and silent. The rumor was that Greg had been caught funneling money through falsified expense reports. Olivia's name was tied to the data leaks that allowed it. I sat at my desk, working on a minor account, pretending not to hear the whispers. My hands were steady. The next morning, an emergency staff meeting was called. The regional director stood at the front, outlining the investigation, careful not to say too much. Halfway through, Greg walked in. His tie was crooked, his face tight with anger. He went straight to the front of the room. "You all think I'm guilty," he said, "but you should know. The real thief is sitting right here." He pointed at me. "Rachel Moore. She's the one who reported the data and set me up." The room went silent. I felt every eye turn toward me. My pulse raced, but I didn't move. The director's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Hollis, we have documentation of your transactions. Your signature is on the forms. Please sit down." Greg froze. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support. There was none. He turned toward me, his expression collapsing from rage to something smaller, almost pleading, but I had nothing left to give him. I stood slowly. My voice was calm. "I resign." No one spoke as I gathered my things. The sound of my heels on the floor echoed louder than any apology he could have offered. When I reached the door, I glanced back once. Greg was still standing there, defeated, surrounded by the truth he had created for himself. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I walked past the parking lot, past the row of trees losing their leaves, until I reached the street. My reflection in the office windows looked unfamiliar. A woman who had finally stopped explaining herself. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I felt still. That night, sitting on my couch with the city lights flickering outside, I realized I had spent my whole life waiting for someone to see my worth. Greg never had. My family never had. Grace had. That was enough. I poured myself a glass of water and turned off my phone. There was no need to celebrate or announce anything. The world didn't need to know what had happened. The truth had already done its work. For the first time, I felt peace instead of pain. Chapter 6. When Karma Visits Everyone Else. The year that followed slipped by quietly, the kind of year that leaves no sharp edges, only a soft rhythm of days blending into each other. I moved to a smaller apartment closer to the water, a place with big windows and a balcony where I could watch ferries glide across Elliott Bay. Grace came to visit often, her health improving with the change of seasons. She would sit on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, while I checked my investments and managed the foundation I had built in her name. Life was steady, simple. I spoke to almost no one from my old job. My family called occasionally, mostly out of obligation, and I answered when I had the patience. I didn't need distance anymore. It had built itself naturally. Then, one by one, the stories began to reach me. My father lost nearly all of his retirement savings after Pamela convinced him to invest in a friend's luxury spa project in Scottsdale. The spa never opened. The friend vanished. My father's voice on the phone was small, brittle. He didn't ask for help, and I didn't offer it. I told him I was sorry to hear it, and he said, "You always were the practical one, Rachel. Maybe I should have listened to you more." That was the closest thing to an apology he had ever given me. A few months later, I got a message from my mother. Richard had left her. She found out he had been seeing one of his office assistants for almost a year. She didn't cry during the call, only spoke flatly about lawyers and paperwork and how humiliating it all felt. I wanted to tell her that sometimes humiliation is the first step toward honesty, but I didn't. I just listened. Then came Linda. The news reached me through a neighbor who was still friends with one of her clients. Tommy had been caught having an affair with another doctor at the hospital. He drained their joint account before leaving. Linda lost her studio space, her car, and soon after, her house. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was a quiet recognition that life had a way of evening its scales without my help. Karma was efficient like that. One rainy Thursday evening, I was folding laundry when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Linda standing there, hair soaked, eyes swollen, clutching a single duffel bag. She looked smaller, like the edges of her had been washed away. "Can I stay for a while?" she asked, her voice breaking. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She stood in the entryway, dripping water onto the hardwood. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I took her bag and pointed toward the couch. "You're freezing," I said. "Let me get you a towel." She nodded, silent, tears gathering in her eyes. For the next few days, the apartment filled with the sound of her quiet movements, the soft closing of doors, the occasional clinking of dishes when she tried to cook as a thank you. We didn't talk about the past, or about Tommy, or about the years we had spent pretending to be sisters out of duty. I let her rest. One morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "I don't know how to start over," she said softly. "You already have," I told her. "You're here. That's a start." She smiled weakly. "You always make it sound simple." "It isn't," I said, "but pretending it's impossible won't help either." Over the following weeks, she tried to find work. She sent out resumes, called old clients, and spent hours scrolling through listings. The silence between us grew less heavy, more natural. I caught her humming sometimes while cleaning, the same tune she used to sing as a teenager when she wanted attention. It felt strange to hear it again. Then, one afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and found her sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. I asked what was wrong. She said she had collapsed earlier that day, walking back from an interview. her chest tightening. I drove her to the emergency room without hesitation. The doctor said it was stress, exhaustion, and dehydration, but they kept her overnight for observation. She looked embarrassed, lying in that hospital bed, tubes taped to her arm. I held her hand while she drifted to sleep. When the nurse came in with the paperwork, I filled in the insurance details with one of my foundation's administrative accounts. The bill wasn't large, but it felt symbolic, like closing a circle that had been left open for too long. A few days later, she was discharged. I brought her home and told her to rest. She protested, said she didn't want to be a burden, but I could see relief in her eyes. 2 weeks after that, while I was at my desk reviewing financial reports, I heard a soft knock on my door. Linda stood there, holding a thin envelope, her face pale. "This came in the mail," she said quietly. "It's addressed to me, but it's from the hospital." I froze. She handed it to me, already open. Inside was a printed receipt marked, "Paid in full." At the bottom, in small letters, it said, "R. Moore Foundation." "That's you, isn't it?" I stayed silent. "You helped me," she whispered. "After everything I said, after the way I treated you." I looked at her, not angry, not proud, just tired. "We all learn through loss," I said. "Some lessons come softer than others." Her eyes filled with tears. She sat down beside me, shoulders shaking. I placed a hand on her back, feeling how fragile she had become. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at my touch. We stayed like that for a while, no apologies, no explanations. It wasn't forgiveness that passed between us, but something quieter, something that felt closer to understanding. Later that night, after she went to bed, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was clear. The city lights reflected on the water. I thought of Grace, of the way she had handed me that envelope without hesitation. I thought of how kindness can travel like light, from one heart to another, if you let it. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. The world below moved on, unaware of the small redemptions happening in one quiet apartment by the bay. It didn't matter. I had seen enough to know that karma rarely needs witnesses, it simply waits, then arrives right on time. Chapter 7. The Price of Anonymity. It started with a phone call from Mark. I was making tea when my cell rang, and his name appeared on the screen. His voice was calm but firm, the way it always was when something serious was coming. "Rachel, we might have a problem. A journalist named Ethan Lewis has been digging into the Powerball winner from Seattle 2 years ago. He's connecting dots, and you're on the list." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. My heart slowed, then sped up again, a stutter of panic. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. "Positive. He's been calling the state lottery office, cross-referencing tax filings, property records. He's smart, patient, and he's close." I sank into the chair, holding the phone tighter. I thought about all the steps we'd taken, every firewall, every trust, every anonymous transfer. "Mark, I did everything right." "You did," he said, "but sometimes doing things right just makes people more curious." After we hung up, I sat in silence. The tea had gone cold. Through the window, I saw a car idling at the end of my street. It could have been nothing, or it could have been the beginning. The next morning, the first reporter showed up. A man with a camera waited outside my building, pretending to check his phone. A woman in a red jacket knocked on my door later that afternoon, asking if I knew anything about Seattle's mystery millionaire. I said no, closed the door, and locked it twice. I called Evelyn that night. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and tired from another long shift at the hospital. "What's going on, Rach? They're starting to find me." "Who?" "Reporters. Mark says a journalist is after the story." There was a pause on the line. Then she said softly, "If they find out, you'll lose your peace." "I know. So what are you going to do?" I looked around my apartment. at the quiet life I had built from secrecy, the simplicity I had fought for. "I don't know yet," I said. "Maybe it's time I tell the truth." "No, Rachel, you don't owe anyone that." Her words were meant to comfort, but they didn't stick. After we hung up, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe hiding had become its own kind of lie. The next day, I drove to Tacoma. Grace was in her garden, wearing her wide straw hat, pruning the roses she loved so much. When she saw me, she smiled as if she had been expecting me all along. "You look troubled," she said. "Sit down before your mind wears a hole in the floor." We sat on the porch, the air smelling like cut grass and tea leaves. I told her everything. About the reporters, about Ethan Lewis, about my fear that the truth would ruin everything. I ended with the part that scared me most. "I don't want to lie anymore, Grace. I'm tired of pretending to be small just to feel safe." She listened without interrupting, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When I finished, she took a slow breath and said, "You don't need to explain your goodness. The people who need to know already do." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were soft. "You wanted peace, not attention. There's a difference. Fame takes what peace gives." I looked down at my hands. "I just don't want this to define me." "Then do something with it that does," she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small table in her kitchen, the sound of her breathing faint through the wall. I opened my laptop and began to type. The Turner Hope Foundation. Mission: to support elderly women living alone through housing assistance, healthcare access, and community programs. The name felt right. Grace Turner had given me hope when I had none. Now it was my turn to give it back. I worked through the night, filling out paperwork, writing a mission statement, choosing words that sounded ordinary enough to keep me hidden. By dawn, the foundation was real, at least on paper. Within weeks, it had a website, a mailing address, and a list of local projects. We donated to small clinics, renovated a few apartments, paid for groceries and prescriptions. Every dollar moved quietly, without my name attached. The first press release described the organization as privately funded by a group of anonymous donors. It was exactly the kind of truth I could live with. Then came the twist I hadn't planned for. Ethan Lewis contacted Grace. He showed up one afternoon while I was visiting. We were having tea when he knocked. He looked polite, almost shy, carrying a notepad and a kind smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. "I'm writing a feature on unsung philanthropists in Washington, and I believe you might be one of them." Grace glanced at me, then back at him. "I'm not sure what you mean, young man." He cleared his throat. "The Turner Hope Foundation. It's named after you, isn't it? Some sources think you're the anonymous lottery winner who started it." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Grace didn't flinch. She smiled that soft, knowing smile that always disarmed people. "I didn't win the lottery," she said. "I just won the love of a remarkable niece." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Then he laughed a little, embarrassed. "That's a beautiful answer. It's also the truth," she said. He thanked her for her time, promised to send her a copy of the article, and left. We watched his car drive away until it disappeared at the end of the street. Grace turned to me and said, "He won't bother us again." "How can you be so sure?" I asked. "Because he found a story worth keeping," she said. And it wasn't about money. That evening, back in Seattle, I sat on my couch watching the local news. The segment came on near the end of the broadcast. The headline read, "The Mystery Benefactor Behind Turner Hope." They showed a picture of Grace smiling in her garden, the reporter calling her a humble inspiration. No mention of me, no mention of the lottery. As the screen faded to commercials, I leaned back, letting the quiet fill the room. My secret was still safe, my name still mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt the kind of calm that wasn't built from fear, but from acceptance. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the bay. I thought of Grace, of her roses, of the foundation that now carried her name. I thought of how anonymity, once a burden, had become a shield. I turned off the TV and let the darkness settle. The air was still, the world moving on without me, exactly the way I wanted it to. My heart, for once, was completely at rest. Chapter 8. Peace is the sweetest punishment. 2 years passed quietly. The days moved like water, smooth and unhurried. I lived with Grace in a small house outside of Seattle, on a street lined with maple trees that turned gold every autumn. The mornings smelled of wet soil and coffee. We tended a modest garden together, rows of lavender, tomatoes, and a patch of wildflowers that seemed to grow wherever they pleased. It was a slower life, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing it. The Turner Hope Foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. Evelyn had left the hospital to join me full-time, helping manage the community programs. She was tireless and kind, the way she had always been. We spent our days visiting small shelters, speaking with women who reminded me of Grace, steady souls who had learned to survive with very little. Every time I saw them smile, I thought about the version of myself who had once believed that worth was measured by what people thought of you. That version of me had long disappeared. Grace thrived in this new chapter. She volunteered at the local library, baked pies for every neighborhood gathering, and became something of a legend in town. Everyone knew her as the woman whose quiet generosity kept people warm in the winter and fed in the summer. She never mentioned the lottery or my name. She didn't need to. Her kindness was enough to fill the silence we had chosen to keep. Life had finally settled into something whole when I began hearing about the people I used to know. Greg Hollis was convicted of corporate fraud and sentenced to prison. The trial made local headlines for a week, then disappeared into the sea of other scandals. When I read the article online, I didn't feel triumph, only a dull acceptance. He had built his success on taking from others, and eventually the ground gave way. Linda had rebuilt her life in Portland. She opened a small studio called Second Chance Art, where she taught classes for divorced women starting over. Once a month, she sent me handwritten letters, never asking for money, only sharing stories about her students. She signed every one with the same line, "Thank you for believing I could still change." My mother and father lived separately now. Caroline had sold the big house and moved into a modest apartment near Tacoma. She spent her days gardening, which made me smile because I finally understood where I had gotten it from. My father retired early, teaching part-time at a community college. His voice on the phone had softened with age. They spoke to each other occasionally, carefully, like two people who had finally learned the cost of being right all the time. I thought about all of them often. Not with bitterness but with something gentler. Like closing a book you once couldn't stop rereading. I never needed their apologies, I just needed peace, and somehow, I had found it. That spring, Grace received a letter from the state. She was being honored with the Washington State Humanitarian Award for her service to the community. When she read it aloud at breakfast, her voice trembled. I told her she deserved it. She shook her head and said she didn't do anything extraordinary. I smiled and told her that was exactly why she did. The ceremony was held in Olympia on a clear April afternoon. The auditorium was filled with volunteers, teachers, and donors. I sat in the third row beside Evelyn, watching Grace walk slowly to the stage. Her dress was pale blue, her silver hair pulled neatly back. When they called her name, the applause rose like a wave. She accepted the plaque with both hands and spoke only a few words. "Kindness is like light," she said. "It travels farther than we think, even when we can't see it." The room fell silent. I could feel tears prick the corners of my eyes. I looked around at the faces in the audience, strangers all of them, yet for a moment, we were connected by something simple and true. Grace had always believed that goodness didn't need witnesses, but it was beautiful to see it recognized anyway. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd and squeezed my hand. "You did this," she whispered. "No," I said. "We did." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the sound, I sat on our porch watching the last light fade. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. Grace was inside, humming softly as she washed the dishes. Evelyn had gone home for the night. The world around me was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of crickets and the distant sound of a train. I thought back to the beginning, to the woman sitting alone in her apartment with a winning ticket and shaking hands. I remembered the fear, the loneliness, the ache of being unseen. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone who had stopped chasing validation and started growing things instead. I had never punished anyone. I had simply waited and let life take its course. Some people call it karma. I think of it as balance, the invisible thread that ties actions to consequences. Sometimes it comes slowly, but it always arrives. The garden lights flickered on, small golden orbs glowing over the flowers. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of lavender. Peace, I realized, was the sweetest punishment of all. If you've ever been hurt by the people you trusted most, remember that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, and when it finally comes, it feels like quiet forgiveness. Live kindly and let karma speak for you.